You at Strong Inspirations once again. I know you are watching me here and there and everywhere on the YouTube channel. Because you know what we're going to do for you. We're going to come up with some information that's going to blow your mind. It blows my mind. I'll be sitting here like, oh my God, I didn't even have a clue of what he's talking about. And I'm so excited because when I don't have a clue and then I learn something new, I feel like I'm a better person, by knowing this history. It makes me proud to know what we went through and how we overcame and all the stuff that, just to know it because we know it. And it's not all negative, you know what I mean? That's not what we do. It all has a good slant to it. I promise you that. And so thank you for watching. I'm Anthony Brogdon. Hit the subscribe button on this channel. My numbers are up, so I know people are doing it. Hit the like button on this video because this guy is going to tell you something that you're going to be like, wow, I had no clue. All right, so hit the like button on this video and then hit the notifications bell, meaning that when I put a new video up, you get a ding or something like that, so that you can be the first to watch it. And then tell somebody about Strong Inspiration. Don't keep this to yourself, trying to act like you know everything just because you watch one of my videos and you don't want nobody else to know. You sitting around in the basement with everybody and you talking about, hey, I know this. Why you don't want them to know? Let them watch the video themselves, okay? Especially them young people. They really need to understand some of this good content that I bring at you. And then also, when you get 75 minutes, about an hour and 15, watch my movie. That's right, I'm a filmmaker. It's called Business in the Black, The Rise of Black Business in America. It's good. I'm telling you, it's good. I've had people who they buy, this is the DVD. I had somebody buy, 30 copies they gave away for Christmas. All right. And it is streaming on Amazon too. And it deals with the rise of Black business, of Black folk in business since slavery days up through the 1960s. All right. And then I wrote a book. It's titled Black Business Book. Oh, I'm a historian now, my friend. I'm serious about the game. And this got over 200 facts. I mean, I got stuff in here that I know you don't know. And if you read my book and you know everything in this book, I give your money back. My book comes with a money back guarantee. No questions asked. And for every 10th book I sell, I donate one to a school. So I've donated over 200 books so far. I think that's not bad for, self-publishing and so on and so forth. And it's called Black Business Book. It's also on Amazon. But to learn more, you want to get it from me directly, just go to my website, businessintheblack.net. You ready, folks? I got a guy on there, he's smiling, he looking good. He said, come on, man, let's go. I got to tell this story about this guy that I've been doing the research on. And so, sir, introduce yourself. Let's get it on.
Well, I'm Grady Atwater. I'm the site administrator of the John Brown Museum State Historic Site. And I am a native of Osawatomie, and I wrote my master's thesis on John Brown.
Now, where is the city at?
The city of Osawatomie we're in eastern Kansas. We are about 30 miles due south of the Kansas City Metroplex.
When you say Metroplex, what's the next big city? Is that near Kansas City?
Kansas City, yes. Kansas City, yes. Uh-huh.
No, okay. So you say 30 miles away from Kansas City.
Right, yes, sir.
And you've always liked Black history or history in general?
Yes, I have. When you're raised here in Osawatomie, the interesting thing about being raised here in Osawatomie is that we were an abolitionist town founded by abolitionists, the town was unique in the area. For instance, that it was one of the towns where there was no real segregation, and because it was founded
Really?
by abolitionists, and it was considered to be something that was you just didn't. It wasn't in the town's DNA to do that sort of thing,
Oh,
because the town was burned down twice, basically, by pro-slavery men, and we certainly weren't going to stand up with people who wanted to discriminate against people. Now, I'm not going to say that we were perfect, that the town has been perfect
yeah.
about it, but for the most part, the town has a history of standing up for civil rights.
When I hold on, let's go into this a little bit, as you might know some of this, not. The town is Kansas a slave state?
No, it was never a slave state.
Okay.
It was a slave territory for just a little bit. Pro-slavery forces were during the conflict. Very basically, they were the pro-slavery people were defeated in the guerrilla war, and by peaceful abolitionists who took a stand uh, against against slavery. John Brown believed in the equality of African Americans and whites in every way in the eyes of God, and he was willing to fight and die for their freedom and equality. And when I
Okay.
say equality, every bit equality.
Before we do the John Brown, go into him. The city. Now, let me. How about this? Let me say this. I heard that in Kansas, you see, because Kansas kind of came a little later than the colonies and the rest. They now, when you go into Kansas, you're not going west.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you're not into that slave and that new. That's Kansas is new territory. Put it that way.
Yes, it is.
All
Mm-hmm.
right. So
This
I
was this
heard
was
that.
this was the extreme west at that point in the 1850s.
Yeah, and I heard that there were squabbles between people, and you just alluded to it, who wanted slavery and those who didn't. They even had a little war themselves before the Civil War began.
Absolutely, it was a very vicious guerrilla war, uh, and the fight was between pro-slavery guerrillas and free state guerrillas, and this was precipitated by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the which was a law that stated there would be a vote on the issue of slavery. And the free state people, the peaceful abolitionists, said, "Well, fine, we'll play ball with you. We'll move there and vote it down." And the pro-slavery people, when they saw people coming in to vote for freedom, for equality, for anti-slavery, they became enraged, and they began to really, if you're looking who started the violence, it was pro-slavery guerrillas. They
Yeah.
tried voter intimidation. They would go to polling places and they would drive off free state people who wanted to vote. They would they voter fraud. They would line up and vote over. There was one over and over again. There was one particular precinct that had around 81 qualified voters that recorded 6,000 votes.
Wow. Okay, now let's go a little bit before that. And this is the feeling is felt so strong against people who did not want slavery, because who founded the town? That was what his premise was.
Yes, the people who founded Osawatomie were the New England Immigrant Aid Society, and they were a group of wealthy abolitionists, and they believed slavery was a moral wrong, just like John Brown, but they were more peaceful people. And the idea that they were wealthy abolitionists from the New England area, and they started the New England Immigrant Aid Society. And what they did was they paid the passage of free state men, abolitionists out here. And the idea was that they gave them enough money and help to settle. And in one of the things about this cabin, the Adair cabin, was that it was that if you were a new settler, you came here. This is the first place you came, and Reverend Adair would help you find land.
So,
And that's one reason why people really wanted to did not like Reverend Adair, at all the pro-slavery people did. And he had a $50 price on whatever pro-slavery man killed him got $50.
Hold on,
And
say
here we're
that
talking.
again. Whatever, say that again.
Reverend Samuel Adair was a peaceful abolitionist, but whoever killed him, whatever Free State man killed him or pro-slavery man killed him, got $50 reward from pro-slavery forces. And they were talking to a minister who never carried a gun.
Did they ever kill him?
Nope, no, they never did.
I mean, that's just easy walking away. He's walking to the grocery store.
Yeah, he would ride around. He would ride around and minister to people. We're talking about a man who was extremely courageous. He lived right here, but now he did record that sometimes what he would do is he would sleep out in the woods, in the timber around the cabins, when he knew the cabin was being washed, waiting for him to come home. Other than that, he never really hid. He was out in the open, like, come and get me.
Yeah. Well, I know, I mean, every place has this, but is there crops that could have grown in Kansas that could have made it amenable for slavery?
Probably yes, if you wanted to, but one of the reasons that Stephen Douglas, who was the committee of was in charge of the Committee on Territories, really thought that this was a good idea, was he figured that Kansas would come in the Union as a free state anyway, because it doesn't lend itself to plantation agriculture. Plantation agriculture in the South was profitable because you could have 3 crop cycles in a year because of the weather. Here you have one.
Because it gets cold in Kansas.
Pardon me?
It gets cold in Kansas.
It gets cold in Kansas. You have one growing season. We're in the middle of it. You get spring, you get summer, and in fall you harvest and you're done.
Is there I mean, are these individual battles, or are these actually group battles where they meet at a plot of land and shooting at each other?
Big guerrilla warfare. It was guerrilla warfare. The thing about this guerrilla warfare was it was extremely vicious, and what happened was that individuals on both sides of the issue began to get progressively more violent as time went on. I mean, it was tit for tat. Give you one, for instance, there was a pro-slavery man named Brown, and he's no relationship to John Brown.
Right, sure.
But he was up near Atchison, and he was arguing in a general store with some pro-slavery men, and it was a freezing cold day. And so he got on his horse to ride home. The pro-slavery men caught up with him, and very basically one of them walked up and buried a hatchet in his head and kept it in there, threw his body in the back of a wagon, and his body froze up with the hatchet in his head. They backed the wagon up, kicked the door open, and threw the door in at the foot of his horrified wife, saying, "There's Brown," and rode off. This is the type of violence that it turned into. And so people answered back and said, "Fine, you want to play hardball? So will we."
How does one know who the other is, other than you talking too much? You know what I mean? When I mean talking too much is you told somebody how you feel. How does somebody know what side of the fence you're on?
Accents. A New England accent came out, boom, guns came out. A Southern accent came out. And the other thing was they had code words. And one thing that someone would ride up on somebody and go, they'd ask, "Are you sound on the goose?" And pro-slavery people knew what that meant. Is, are you pro-slavery? Now, if you're from New England, you may not know what that means. And if you didn't know what that meant, you got shot.
All right. Okay, given this then, how many people would they estimate were killed in this battles or scrimmages?
Well, they estimate the people that they can count 200. And by the time they add everybody up, and it could probably was more than that, because what tended to happen was they were, if you heard the term bushwhackers, what they would do is people would be riding along and they would hear a voice from the brush going, "Are you sound on the brush? Are you sound on the goose?" And so the person standing around, and they don't know, And if they answer wrong, bam, and everybody
Wow,
writes
that's
off.
wow.
Oh yes, it was vicious. One of the things that this cabin has is it has a second story floor that was loft that was added by John Brown and his 5 sons for the very reason that what they would do is they would have a spy watch someone, a pro-slavery man's free state or pro-slavery man's house, wait till they got home, snuck back in the house about midnight or so, and then they would surround the house and either walk up and kick the door in and throw a firebomb in the middle of the cabin, or pull the man out and say, you've got 3 days to leave, or we're going to come back and kill you, or kill him, and or push them away and burn their cabin down and say, start walking. And both sides did very cruel things like this. I mean, and it just got worse as time went on.
Is there, okay, how about this? Is there a side of town that the pro-slavery people live compared to the abolitionists?
Actually, there was a tiny minority of pro-slavery people in Osawatomie. Interestingly, what would happen is, and what contributed to the viciousness of it, and literally you have sports rivalries today that are still based on this, in small towns in Kansas, is you would have towns that would be founded that were pro-slavery, and then the Free State people would found a town close enough to counterbalance the voting. The idea was you founded a town, if you had a pro-slavery town. We had a town 7 miles to the north of us that was a pro-slavery town, and we were founded as an answer to that town. And as a matter of fact, there was a town that they said, well, fine. There was a town in New Georgia, about 3 to 5 miles west of Osawatomie, and pro-slavery men from Free State men from Osawatomie went out, and John Brown tried to talk them out of this because he thought he knew it would bring an attack on the town, and it did. They went and burned that town down to make sure it didn't prosper. So that you would not have a side of town; it would be different towns. And this is one reason why we're talking someone with very easy riding distance of each other. That would towns attacking each other.
Wow. Okay, I did hear that. So what about this then? Is there a if the pro-slavery people lived in the town and it still was up for question, did they try to participate and have slaves during that time when it was still up for question?
Well, there were very few slaves that actually came into Kansas, and there were a few people that might bring their personal. The only slaves that I found really in Kansas were the personal servants, right. That they would bring, the personal slaves that just took care of them. And the reason is they did not want, and this is Reverend Adair, I'm quoting Reverend Adair on this. Someone wrote him a letter asking this very question. She said, no, there were not very many slaves actually in Kansas because the slaveholders didn't want to bring their slaves in when the area is swarming with abolitionists that will ride up and basically free them, because they would. I mean, it would be, they'd find out someone had a slave, and 5 guys would mount up and say, get on the horse to the slave and say bye, or while they shot at the slaveholder. I mean, the slave property was extremely unsafe in this area. Let's putting it mildly.
Really? Was there is there a battle, and I don't know, you maybe answered this, is there a battle that's like the biggest battle between the two forces?
Right here. This right there, I'm sitting on it. It's 23 acres. It's the Battle of Osawatomie. And John Brown led around 45 pro-slavery Free State men here, between 30 and 45 against a force of between 200 and 400 pro-slavery men right here on this very site. What happened was, just in a nutshell, the road to town went through the battlefield, in and out of town, going up toward Lawrence. And John Brown basically blocked the road into town because the pro-slavery people were going to come in and burn and loot Osawatomie. They had about 8 or 9 wagons.
So he heard this. He got wind of that.
He did. He found out that found out because they came in and attacked, and they had planned on attacking before August 30th, 1856, and a great group of men came from all around to fight the pro-slavery forces. About a force of around 1,200 men headed toward Osawatomie. The commander, David Rice Atchison, of the pro-slavery force, said, "We don't want that big of a fight. Head off toward Lawrence." And when he did, everybody scattered, and John Brown sent his men to check on their families. Well, then when he got a little bit north of Osawatomie, he turned to one of his one of his officers named John Reed and said, "Now go attack Osawatomie with 250 men. You'll have a lot better time of it." And he was right. He surprised John Brown's men, and they had to hastily gather 45 men. And so, but on the other hand, the battle did last about an hour. And Brown was very effective in keeping the pro-slavery force from coming into town, which gave everybody time, the Free State people, time to get out of town and whatever property they wanted to get out of town.
Did the federal government, and I guess Abraham Lincoln is not the president at this point. This is before his term. Did the federal government do something to help ease tensions or something like that?
Oh, no. They did. They squarely came down on the pro-slavery side. I mean, you talk about a government that's biased. That was a government that was biased against anything abolitionist. What we have to understand about abolitionists at the time is, and that it's hard to fathom today, is that amongst most white Americans, abolitionists were radicals. They were the lunatic fringe. One of the reasons, for instance, John Brown is considered to be insane, to be blunt honest with you, that's because he believed in the equality of African Americans' rights in the eyes of God, and he did things in that he was going to fight and die for their freedom. He did things like he would that we would not even blink about today, that any reasonable, intelligent person would do. Like if you met an African American lady or gentleman, he would say, "Good morning, sir," or "Good morning, Mr. Smith," or "Mr. Jones," and people just would freak out. I mean, how?
I got you.
If you met an African American doctor, you would say, "Good morning, Dr. Smith."
Yeah.
That's something that a lot of white Americans wouldn't do clear up into the 1970s or 50. This is something people. What's with these people? What's with him?
Okay.
And that's where the insanity thing comes from with John Brown. He just said, "Fine, think what you want to. These people are equals."
Before we get into John Brown in particular, how did all that squabble battles end? I mean, what finally happened? Did the good defeat the evil, as I like to call it?
Oh yes. What happened was the pro-slavery forces had admitted defeat in Kansas. So many abolitionists flooded into Kansas that they outpopulated the pro-slavery people, and they dug their heels in. And when they were attacked, they didn't, they went and hid in the woods and came back out and rebuilt their cabins. It was just simply, we're not going anywhere. We're standing here. We're talking people from New England, like that, who were really motivated. They thought that racism, slavery was wrong, and they wanted to defeat it. And the second thing was, of course, militants like John Brown. They were actually relatively effective.
The people for freedom, did they attack, or were they more on the defensive?
More on the defensive. The reason I say that is that the original idea of the Free State settlers was to not use violence, and most of them did not use violence. So the plan was, I'll tell you, the overall plan of the Free State peaceful abolitionists was that they understood that the way Southern agriculture worked was the plantation owners were going for pure profit, and they would exhaust soil of all its nitrates and its nutrients, and they would just keep moving west, and they'd hit the Mississippi and the Missouri River. And so they said, well, if we can stop the spread west of plantations, we can kill plantation agriculture, and then what we can do is we can peacefully end slavery without firing a shot, because the profitability of it will go away and they'll have to do something different.
Right.
And so then what happened was, so that they thought, we'll just pack all these states with free state abolitionists, these new territories. And the Southern leadership realized that that was a strategy. And that's one reason why they were so incensed, because they recognized what was going on.
Is there other states or territories that had similar circumstance than Kansas that came along, or once
Yes,
Kansas was the first, the only, and once they saw it happen, it just ended? How did that go?
Well, what happened, what's interesting to note is, I've talked to people from Minnesota, and what a lot of Southern gentlemen, plantation owners would do is, during the heat of the summer in the South, they would go to Minnesota. And I've talked to Minnesota. There was a mini version of this happened in Minnesota. And they tried this in other states, but Kansas effectively stopped it. I mean, the march west of slavery was effectively stopped in Kansas.
So now, this is John Brown born in Kansas?
He was born in Torrington, Connecticut, on May 9th, 1800.
How does he get to Kansas to start sticking his nose, if I may say this, in that battle?
Well, it was all because of his son, John Brown Jr. What happened was, he was 50. You have to understand, he was 55, and you have to think 85 by our standards, because most people didn't live that long. And he was considered elderly, so he was going to retire to his farm in North Elba, New York. His son, John Brown Jr., wrote him a letter, because the 5 of John Brown's sons had moved out here to Kansas to both make a new start and to work to oppose the pro-slavery forces. And they had only brought with them a shotgun and a pistol, and they were under severe attack by pro-slavery guerrillas. So John Brown Jr. wrote a letter back to his father saying, "Father, we need guns more than anything else. We are under attack. We're really in severe danger." And so John Brown, being the family man and an abolitionist, said, "I'm there. My sons are being killed." And he stopped at every free state, every abolitionist town, and he got up, and he was a fundraiser par excellence. By the time he got here, he had a wagon load of weapons. And so and so that's why he came here. His son, John Brown Jr.
Did men come along behind him saying, "Okay, you going down there, fight, I got your back," type thing?
Right. This is because what he does, he was also a great PR person, and he wrote letters back. And back before CNN and you had the news, what people would do is they would write letters, knowing full well newspapers would get a hold of them. And so he would write letters, send them to abolitionists. Abolitionists would put them in the papers back in these abolitionist communities, and people would start coming, and people started coming because him and other abolitionists did this very same thing. The only people that you had really covering it were people called news stringers, and they were people who kind of independents who went around and they wrote letters back like that, but mostly it was just through letters.
So John Brown gets to town, and he's an older guy, so he can't run too far, he can't do too much, right?
Oh, he was one reason that he could get young, he amazed young people, was he was extremely physically fit. He could outlast them. He embarrassed them, because here he is, he's this quote unquote elderly man, and he's got these 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are exhausted behind him, and he's saying, "Let's keep going." And that's one reason that everyone was amazed. They'd all be wanting to fall out of their saddles. He's still going. He had stamina beyond belief. He had strength beyond belief.
Was he a tall guy, or big guy, or anything?
He was, by the standards of the day, he was extremely tall. He was 5'10", and the average height was around 5'5", 5'6". And so to most people, he was taller than most people. He was, and so he could intimidate people if he wanted to. The steely gaze he's known for, he could turn on and off depending on the situation. And he was an extremely effective guerrilla fighter.
Did any of his sons get killed?
Yes, his son Frederick got killed here before the Battle of Osawatomie. And what happened was his son Frederick had what we would call cognitive or intellectual disabilities today. And he was a very nice, trusting person, much an abolitionist, believed like his father. But before the Battle of Osawatomie, he was walking to the Adair cabin to get some breakfast and some letters to take to Lawrence, and he came upon 3 scouts. Now anybody else would have hid, but not him. He walked up and said hello, and they shot him through the heart. And that's when now at Harper's Ferry, Oliver and Watson Brown were killed. But those were the only children who were killed in the conflict.
How many kids did he have?
He had 20. 20, but 9 of them didn't survive to adulthood. But that was not completely unusual for people to have that many children.
From the same wife or a bunch of wives?
2 wives.
Girlfriends?
He had 7. Diane Flusk Brown bore him 7, and Mary Day Brown bore him 13.
Wow. And you said only 9 of them survived.
Well, nine of them died before they got to childhood. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, and that could happen. So John Brown comes to town and says, "Okay, we're gonna." So does he become the kind of de facto leader of the movement against the
more or less, yes,
slave me?
Yes,
and everybody is meeting at his house and figuring out strategies and all that kind of thing?
Well, okay, in typical guerrilla fashion, he did not command people. I think the largest group I've seen, he had 30 men under his command. But he was, guerrilla in a guerrilla warfare on purpose. People are not. You don't have a command structure so that if you take out one group of people, you've hamstrung the whole movement. But he was one of the oldest men doing it, if not the oldest man who was a leader. He was actually well read for the area. He had studied, he had visited earlier in his life. He had visited Europe, and he had visited the battlefields of Europe, and had studied the guerrilla warfare of Spain. So he was knowledgeable about guerrilla warfare. And so when he stood up to speak, people listened, which is why he was a target.
I gotta ask this: when you say guerrilla warfare, what does that actually mean? Does that mean it's me and 3 of my buddies, and we see somebody, we just go get them and take them out? What does guerrilla warfare mean?
Well, guerrilla warfare, it's one of the terms I've used for that I've seen used for it is war of the flea, and or war of the gnats. And the thing about guerrilla warfare is a guerrilla warrior is somebody. It's usually a very small group, 5 to 10 men, 5 to 10 guerrillas of any gender. It doesn't really matter what gender. And what they do is they harass more than they fight. And the idea is just kind of, when they call it the war of the gnat, is if you've ever had a lot of gnats going around and it just drives people nuts.
Yeah.
The idea is to make it so expensive to fight you, and then you just wear down the larger force. And so what they do is a lot of surprise, like 5-minute attacks, attack a force at night. And they're very extremely mobile. They tend to carry advanced weapons that they can have 5 men can have a lot of firepower. And the idea is you take a larger, another term for it is asymmetrical warfare. You take a larger force and you harass them so much, and you make it so expensive, and that the attitude gets, well, like whatever. If you want to see a really good example of that, try Vietnam. Okay. The Viet Cong just, they could. What they would do is exactly what I just described. Okay. American troops would go in and control areas, and then they would, in the night would fall, and they'd be walking down, blamity blam, and then the jungle would come alive with fire, and then the American troops would be going. It's very brave, but you had generals in Vietnam still fighting World War II, didn't know how to deal with it.
I got you.
That's what, in a nutshell, what it is. It's just very basic. Like if you think of gnats going around and you're
I
like,
got
hey,
you.
whatever, I'm going inside,
When you mentioned that he had 45 men that battled almost 200 men, what
Mhm.
what I know that was a guerrilla warfare, but how did he starve them off from not shooting all his men?
Ah,
Yeah, what
well,
was that
he
like?
was he was particularly good leader. That's why people followed him. What he did was he had a stone wall. There was on this battlefield where our power plant is now on the far end of the park. There was a three-sided stone corral. This was a pasture, is what it was, and the road out of town overlooked the pasture. Okay,
All right.
and in the pasture, and so he took up positions in that pasture, and they could not get past him. And so what he did was he was armed with sharp rifles, which were kind of the exotic rifle of the day, had greater firepower. He put a group of guerrillas blocking the road effectively, and this forced the pro-slavery people to charge him on horseback, which they did from the south to north, and basically he held them off for 45 minutes until everybody ran out of ammunition.
And
And
then
pardon me.
and then the pro slavery forces left when they ran out of ammunition, or what happened?
Well, actually, what happened was Brown retreated north. Here's what you did. The classic guerrilla strategy is basically this: you fight real sharp for 5 minutes. Your idea is if you have a column of, say, let's say 400 men, and you 250 to 400 men, and you want to fight them. One of the things that you want to do is you want to kind of do to give you an example, take the in American history, the Battle of Lexington, and as the men as the British were marching back from Lexington, Concord to Boston. What American guerrillas did, was that there was a wall lined with stone fences, and they did exactly what I'm describing. Now, what happened was the British got the officers said, now go out there. So 3 or 4 or 5 British soldiers would go running off into the woods to try to find the one guy that had fired at them. And so then run right into guerrilla ambush. Boom, 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 British soldiers dead. And so in effect, what you do is you want your enemy to get exasperated, angry at you, and then divide their force up into like small units. And what you've done is you've taken that 250, 400 men, and you've made that force a much less formidable, and you're fighting on a much more even footing. And once Brown retreated, what he wanted to do was to force them to scatter to go look for him. And so now you've got 400 men scattered all over the area.
Okay. How big a territory is this area that we're talking about that battle maybe have happened?
23 acres. Now, if I took the whole battle, I'd have to take the west half of town out. No one's going to go for that. But this is where the heat of the battle was. But what Brown did was he had his men harass the pro-slavery men as they marched into Osawatomie until they got here to where the heat of the battle was.
Oh, now what eventually happened? Okay, well, no. Before that question, did the pro-slavery people ever find out where John Brown lived and just tried to ambush him at home one day when he was just eating dinner?
This is interesting thing. What happened? This cabin where he was at. He did not come here. He purposely after the battle. He did not want his half sister Florella, who was married to Reverend Adair, who was 8 months pregnant, to get harmed. So he didn't come to the cabin. So, but everyone thought he would come to the cabin. So the pro-slavery force sent 24 men to surround the cabin. They brought the cannon along, thinking they're going to have a big fight with him in the cabin. Well, what happened was Florella walked out, and she was 8 months pregnant, and she didn't know whether her husband was alive or dead, or her half brother. She had been, she had a house full of refugees from the battle. It was boiling hot. She was wearing the maternity clothes of the day. She was not happy. And she just said, you know, gentlemen, you may have anything you want in and around the place, but spare the house. I'm, you know, take care of the set. And slam the door in this. And
they didn't kill her
no, they did not.
upset him.
They did not. They just not. They came in and said, we don't harm women and children, and but if we catch them in, we'll kill them, and rode off. Of course, they took their cattle and horses, but you know.
Oh, okay. So now, what finally happens to John Brown after all this? Does he outlast all these battles, or does he die before it's over?
Oh, he died. No, he outlasted. He was a good guerrilla fighter. He knew when to retreat. He knew when to. No one ever caught him until Harper's Ferry. He was canny about it. I mean, he always knew he had supporters around. He always had people watching out. Even federal marshals didn't catch him. But you know, he was a man of very calm nerves. So, but what happened was, eventually, what happened? His raided Harper's Ferry. Let
me stop you there. What is Harper's Ferry?
Okay, what happened at Harper's Ferry?
What is it though? What is it? Yeah.
Oh, well, Harper's Ferry was actually, it's a town. It was.
So that's not a port. That's just a city.
Yeah, that's a city. Yep. Okay, and it's where the and it's where the reason he picked that was two reasons. One, it's where the United States had one of two of its armories where it made weapons for the military. And secondarily, and this is the real reason he went there, because he didn't get weapons there. He had better weapons. He had sharp rifles, better than anything he had gotten there. The enslaved African Americans there in that area were actually a great deal more independent and had more, and had been literally taught how to hunt and all that, than slaves that would be down south in what was called the Black Belt, where you had a lot of the big plantations in the rice plantations and all that. So he wanted to recruit those slaves because he thought they would be better leaders of guerrilla parties with the other slaves, because they were basically independent. Because when he went to Augustus Washington's house, who owned slaves, and then Brown's men said, "Where are your slaves?" He says, "I don't know. You know, they'll be back on Sunday." You know, once they got their work done, they could go do whatever they pleased. You know, now that didn't make slavery good or anything, but they were still slaves. But that it was, he thought these would be the better enslaved African Americans to have as leaders. And so what happened though, in the long run, he went into Harper's Ferry to the armory and took over the armory, and hoping to attract slaves, and he attracted 50. And he was beginning to attract more. But what happened was, that was his downfall, because he waited too long and he was surrounded. And those African Americans that joined him kind of went back to their plantations because the punishments that would have been visited upon them were, they used to do to slaves that escaped. They would take them and tie them to a tree and flay the skin off their bodies in front of all the other slaves, burn them alive, hang them. I mean, the barbaric punishments were horrific. So they had a lot to lose. And when things started to fall apart, they went back to their plantations. And so really the idea that he had was not to start a bloody slave insurrection, but he wanted to start there at Harper's Ferry, get a good core group of slaves, former slaves, go out into the Appalachian Mountains, and then have them go out into plantations and free so many slaves that the South would have felt like they had to give up slavery, because they would destroy the economic value of slaves. Because he had learned that from Kansas, see, that there weren't that many slaves because slaveholders didn't bring their slaves into a place where they might be stolen. So he thought, well, it works in Kansas, why not here?
Now, Harper's Ferry is not in Kansas, right?
No, it is not. It's in West Virginia. It was in Virginia, then West Virginia now.
So how did he finally, how did he die?
Well, he was captured, and he was put on trial, and he was hung for, interestingly enough, murder, inciting a slave insurrection, and this is one of the most bizarre charges ever made: treason against the state of Virginia. I didn't know you could commit treason against the state, but apparently that was a law in Virginia.
And at this point, he's in his 60s or something like that?
He was 59.
When he got hung.
Try 99 or 89. Like I say, I always say it's hard for us to really consider that.
Now, so the place that you're at is called what? And it's a tourist location. People come and see the property, and what's there?
What we have here in Osawatomie, Kansas, this is the John Brown Museum State Historic Site,
Okay.
and it is the original Adair cabin, which was John Brown's headquarters. It has the original furniture, the very, very few things that are not original in the cabin. It is inside of a stone pergola, so it's open year round, and it's immaculately preserved.
Okay.
It is in John Brown Memorial Park, which is the site of the Battle of Osawatomie. We have a walking tour of the battlefield,
Okay.
and it's located in Osawatomie, which was John Brown's headquarters. And we have 7 sites on the National Register. For instance, we have the Soldiers Monument where the Free State casualties of battle are buried. We have multiple John Brown related sites here in town.
Okay. And what's the website?
The website that you would go to is the City of Osawatomie's website, www.osawatomie.kansas.org. And that will tell you about it. And then there's the State Historical Society.
Is that his picture behind you?
Yes, it is.
That's his picture.
Right there. That's one of his pictures.
Okay. Well, hey, everybody, that's what we do at Strong Inspirations. I find these people that tell you these amazing stories and they give it to you in their words. I just try to come up with some questions. I thank you so very much for being on the show. To my viewers, I thank you for watching the show. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the, you know the buttons. Come on, I ain't gotta go with your buttons no more. I'm through. Man, this guy gave his life for some black folk. And then they want to say crazy. You add it up. Watch my movie, read my book, all that good stuff. And to you for telling that, I really appreciate you. And I want to say to you, and I wish you with all sincerity, that you stay strong, that you stay safe, and that you stay on your grind, because we love what you're doing, keeping that history good, because that's a good story about John Brown. I had heard of him, but I didn't understand it until you explained it.
Oh, thank you.
For being on the show. We'll be in touch.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.